Hey, all. Thanks for being a part of the podcast. Here's the sermon from June 3rd at Solomon's Porch. It's one of our typical gatherings, and just me talking in this particular sermon with some other interactions around the Beatitudes, kind of an introduction and ways to think about them. I tried to make my point right at the end and sort of got cut short. But anyway, you'll listen your way through and see if you agree that one way to engage the Beatitudes is that all of us are one of these nine, and we kind of see the world through this lens. It's the way I'm thinking about it right now anyway. So here it is, that sermon. In coming weeks, you'll hear soapbox sermons from different people at Solomon's Porch giving 10-minute soapbox sermons. So I chewed up 2 soapbox sermons worth for this 20-plus minute sermon. So here it is. Hope you enjoy.
I imagine that in the time of the beginning of the Christian faith, first century on, that talking about race then was a big deal. It's a big deal now. It's been a part of the human participation all along. Which brings me into the sermon. We are going to be dealing with this sermon, the Beatitudes part of what's called the Sermon on the Mount. Over the course of the summer, there's a sign-up sheet right there underneath that loaf of bread that has 5 slots left if you want to sign up. There'll be 2 people each week doing a 10-minute soapbox sermon on each one of the, what are numbered in our counting, 9 lists of what are referred to as the Beatitudes. This is how they start up here. Jesus goes up on the mountainside, sits down, the disciples come around him. This is going to be important for my bit of introduction today, that it was the disciples that came around him. I'll say why that matters to some people much more than it does to me. But anyway, the disciples came around and he starts teaching him. Then he launches in to this series of statements with blessed are, blessed are, blessed are, blessed are. Does that 9 times. And that has picked up a bit of a catchy little short phrase called the Beatitudes, the blessed attitudes. That's where the B part of this comes from. I think it's probably one of the kind of worst sort of little puns that you could come up with. I don't personally care for it. But mostly I don't care for it because I don't think it's an issue of attitudes. Just to sort of inject my own thoughts. Like, these are not the blessed attitudes. I think there's something else. We're going to be exploring over the course of the summer what those, what the options might be. So if you sign up for a soapbox sermon or have already signed up for one, you can take your 10 minutes any way you want. You might be saying, oh, I totally think these are attitudes. And have your way with it as an attitude. Totally fine. So every presenter will take their own path on it. They're going to be people have signed up, and you will too when you do, for a set. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs the kingdom of heaven. That's the topic for that day. One person might do the first part, another person the second. They both might do only the second part. They both might do the whole thing. They both might only do the first. That's up to you to coordinate or not coordinate with someone who wants to be a part of it. Okay, so I'd like us to read through these. Each week before the soapbox sermons, we're going to read through these. This week I'll suggest that different one of us take each one of them. So you would read the blessed are the poor in spirit, for there's the King of Heaven, and somebody else will take the next one. And we'll just hear these over and over as we go as a community. So anybody who wants to read the first one, let's do it that way.
Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted.
Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth.
Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled.
Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy.
Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God.
Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you.
So there were 9 of them, the way that we listed them out here. Some people will count only 8. So if you're ever Google searching around, or you're at a dinner party and you want to nerd out on some Bible trivia, this last one sometimes is not included. Some people include this last one. Blessed are you when people insult you because of me, Jesus speaking. they say is sort of a continuation of blessed are those who persecute you because of righteousness. So some people have 8 of these blessed attitudes. Some people have 9. Some people even get to 10. I can't explain why, because I don't really understand it, but they get to 10. Then it finishes with Jesus saying, you are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world. And I think all that matters. Okay, so what I thought we would do for this opening start here is to have a little conversation about different approaches that people have taken to the Beatitudes. Here's why. Because I think they actually represent not only categories of thinking about these that might be really helpful to all of us, but they not only represent the categories of discussion about this particular beginning of the Sermon on the Mount sermon, but actually they represent how people think about any teachings of Jesus or the Christian faith overall. And this can be really helpful to a lot of us who are trying to manage our way through what do we do with the sayings and teachings of Jesus. There's a lot of us in the room who have been rethinking our faith, and we think about how we understand Christianity and the world and ourselves and God in fresh and new and different kinds of terms. And one of the conflicts that some of us run into is it's a little hard to know what to do with the teachings of Jesus. So there are 9 classical approaches that somebody, not me, but that people who care about this sort of thing broke up and put into 9. And I thought, well, there's kind of these 9 Beatitudes, and then there's these 9, but I want to suggest a +1 to this. So there's going to be, we'll briefly go through each of these 9, and then I want to suggest an additional way that you might want to think about engaging with the Beatitudes as we make our way this summer. Some of these will sound very familiar to you. My guess is that there's people in the room for whom, as we discuss each of these approaches, not only again about this particular content, but any of the teachings of Jesus or sort of Christianity as a whole, you will recognize this as the approach that somebody in your life has taken to instruct you about Christianity. So I have much bigger versions of each of these, so if you're having trouble reading the screen there, you don't have to. All right, so the first approach to all of this is what's often called the medieval view. Most of you probably were not taught a medieval view of the Beatitudes, but maybe if you were somehow raised in a faith tradition that had specialized clergy or monastic orders. Here's what people in the medieval view said about the Beatitudes. They didn't think it applied to every joker that's ever walked the earth. They said, just as Jesus went up on the mountain, sat down, his disciples came to him, and to those people he said these words. They put those people to mean the 12, the selected ones. This was specific content intended for the leaders of the community, that they would live in a particular way, and by them living in a particular way, they would be a witness to the rest of the world. So if you know what a monastic order is, where a group of people live together, or as men, or a group of women that would live together in some sort of a cloister in a committed faith group, that the Beatitudes and all the teachings of Jesus especially apply to certain clergy. So this can show up sometimes in Catholic traditions, because Catholics, along with the Orthodox, have carried monastic kinds of traditions. So some Catholic traditions, the priest in the community will say that the Beatitudes apply more to them than it does to the rest of us. They've made special claims, special vows, so it applies especially to them. So they're not concerned that the President of the United States or that the kid down the street practices peacemaking. That's for a specialized community to do. All right? So that's one. At any point, if this connects with you, if this is what you were taught and you want to chime in, feel free to, or I'm going to just sort of make my way quickly through each of these. All right? So, all right. The second one, Luther's approach. You might know Luther was a reformer, but he was a Catholic priest, was often in discussions with the monastic people and had a different view from other Catholics. A bit of an argument internal to the faith. His view was, look at all the teachings of Jesus, especially the Beatitudes, and understand that they are an impossible call that you will never fulfill. Just like the law of Moses was to the Jews, so are the Beatitudes for Christians. You will never fulfill them. Good news for Luther, the way he pitched it was, you're simultaneously saint and sinner, so you will never achieve because of your sinnerness, but you will be forgiven and exalted by God to saintlyhood, even if you don't complete this. In fact, it's better if you don't, because then you show that you have the need for God. So if you were raised in a Lutheran tradition, they would often say, here's your calling. You all know you're not going to fulfill it. Thanks be to God for the grace and mercy, right? Preaching law and grace. You'll never fulfill it. So you hear this and you're like, yep, not that, not that, not that. You get to the end of the 9 and you say, woe is me, but thank you to God for forgiving me and for freeing me and calling me again, right? So that's kind of the recap of the Lutheran tradition. And then there's different versions of Lutheran tradition. So some of you I know are Lutheran. Some of you are Lutheran trained. Any comments about my mischaracterization or how you would explain any of this?
Pretty good.
Pretty good? Yeah.
I grew up in a more conservative, not the LCA, but a more conservative Lutheran tradition, and that was definitely a part of it. But one thing I got exposed to in different Christian theologies later in life was all the social justice-y stuff.
Yeah.
So all the realizing stuff in community, which is on every other page of the Bible or even every page, and it's like, oh, well, okay, there's this, the poor and all this other stuff. So anyway, I feel like that's wrapped into the Beatitudes. So it's funny because I was really steeped, from a young age, really steeped in Bible stories and stuff, but for some reason that reality of community, the poor, social justice, all this stuff was sort of not dealt with super actively, and I feel like it was because of that. It was very personal, moral failing. God comes in and saves you, and also there was a lot of sort of make sure you take deep account of your moral crimes every possible time you can, and live with that as a reality. But I didn't always feel so full.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that happened that you're obviously a product of, in the last 150 years, maybe last 100 years, maybe more like last 50 years, religions have been mixing and blending and interacting with each other in really new ways. And they're starting to affect each other. Any Lutheran today is a long way from Luther, right? So they've all been influenced and affected by all these other forces and are having to wrestle with them. Each of these ideas, even monastic orders, are they had to reconsider themselves based on Luther's teachings and then onward. So none of these views are pure, which is one of the things that can feel confusing to some of us, especially if you fall for or partner up with someone in your life, someone who comes from a different tradition. You're like, well, aren't you just a curious bundle of religious ideas, right? All right, here's a third one, the Anabaptist view. The Anabaptists, these are the twice baptized people, the people that never bought into the Lutheran, Orthodox, or Catholic approach. The Anabaptists, so this would be some Baptists, Mennonites, Quakers, lots of those people. They take a literal view which applies to all of these teachings. No, literally do these things, each of you, just as they are written, as they say it. Be peacemakers. I hang around this Anabaptist group. We were in Philadelphia a couple of weeks ago, and they melted down. We melted down an AK-15 rifle into a plowshare to sort of take literal, become peacemakers and do this thing that you did in the Old Testament prophetic calling of pounding weapons into plowshares. So literally, there's a forge out there literally doing this, right? So if you grew up Anabaptist, this list, Anabaptists sometimes, after reading the Beatitudes, love going into a Lutheran church where someone says, hey, we know you're not going to get away with it. You're not going to pull it off, but you're forgiven anyway, right? Because it can feel really overwhelming to Anabaptists. How does someone do all 9 of those? Just becomes a burden. The social gospel view took on another view. This is classic 20th century liberals. They would say it's the basis for society. It's not like the Anabaptists that are saying that each person needs to do this. No, Jesus is proclaiming a way of society, and what we should do is build systemic structures of meekness and caring for those who are poor and bringing about righteousness and hunger. Build it into the society. Now, what you can start to imagine is different kinds of people are like, oh, that sounds way better than that other view. And somebody else is like, no, that sounds terrible, because you don't change society without changing the heart. You have to change the heart. And here is the basis for religious dialogue, discussion, argument, and goodness, right? Is how do people view it? All right, a couple more. There's the Christian existential view. If you don't know existentialism, you're not into your 20th century version of Kierkegaardian philosophy, well, your life has been a little empty all of these years. But Christian existentialism would have these three kind of characteristics to it. Really internal. Each person should decide for themselves what their experience is. It's really personal, how it's going to play out in your personal life, and it's paradoxical. Christian existentialists, like other existentialists, would argue the real teaching of Jesus is never in the literal words. It's in what you understand it to be and how that gets internalized into your life. So unlike the Anabaptists, unlike the Lutherans, unlike the social gospel people, they would say each one of us will spin this up in a different way and it will do something in and for and through you personally. A highly personalized and paradoxical experience. A little of this and a little of that. The impossibility and the imminence. Anybody experience that or know that? Was that your view? You might find that in a lot of Unitarian churches. Some other places you'll find that view. Okay. Schweitzer had a view of the imminent eschatology. Now, you might not be sort of into Schweitzer, so you may not have ever heard of this one, but you might know some of the derivatives of this, and that would be the people that take this on as dispensationalism. If you went to a Bible church or something like that, they would say this is an interim ethic until we get to a later time when Christ returns. So this is a temporary holdover. These are like little temporary signs out on the street out there that say no parking Monday through Wednesday, right? They're not meant to be a grand ethic for society. They're not just for monastic communities. They're not just for interpersonal life for you to sort of grow and develop in your own paradoxical way, but they exist as a Christian, hold the fort until the full kingdom of God comes with the return of Jesus. Then all things will be made right. So we're just creating temporary space for this to happen for now. That's a really common version of spirituality for a lot of Christians. My friend Chris pastors a church in Houston, and a number of years ago he said at this little public meeting, this great line, he said, he was raised in a system that taught like this. He said, I was raised to interact with the rest of the world the way that I tell my children to approach a public bathroom. Get in, get out, and touch as little as possible, and don't be made dirty by it. So the way you live in the world is in a temporary way, and all of these 9 and all the teachings of Jesus protect you from being polluted by the world until you wait for your rise and your return and the return of Jesus so you can be protected. Yeah, right.
For number 6 and number 7, which I think was the dispensationalist one, when I know that view well, because in my theological days I would argue against it or try to get people to move past it the way that I did and found more motivation to help make the world a better place.
Yeah.
But the response was always, why polish the brass on a sinking ship?
Yeah.
So that's part of we don't care about the environment because it's all going to burn.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. We don't have to work because almost like they would call it the social justice craft.
Right.
Bible believers, like the whole millions of Bible believing Christians, because it was viewed as distrusting. You're not living like Jesus is about to return and make it all right. You don't have to do anything except be as pure and holy and isolated in a way from culture as you can, because that's a show of your faith that he's going to do more than you can. So why polish the brass on the same ship? Which to me is not very hopeful, and it ends up being the opposite. That's what I was taught growing up, and I was taught that was the right biblical way. And then, kind of like you said, when you shown this whole other social justice, even though it's on every page, was a huge turnaround and motivated me to want to. I share that with other people, and be like, there's way more that you can do to make the world a better place, a friendlier, more peaceful place, a more just place, and it still is in line with Scripture that you need concern about how you live life.
That's very well articulated, and it'll launch us into the 7th one, and the critique that each of these have of each other. If you hold one of these views really well, and you're ever around somebody who it seems like they hold one of the other views, ask them to critique your view for a while. It really helps. Like that kind of clear critique of one starts to pull out in relief. And when you hear the other people's critique of your own view of spirituality or humanity or God or human thriving or any of this, boy, it really sharpens your own understanding of the impulses and the implications of what you're getting at. Oh, yes.
I was just going to say that, going back to race, the dispensationalists, wait till sinking ship stuff can be a very privileged position to take in the world, because as long as your way is basically guaranteed, or you have the option of separating yourself out, and it's not that people of color will never take this approach theologically, but as a public school teacher, what I experience is, if this system that we're in doesn't make stuff right, like, some people don't have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Like, some people can go homeschool, other people got to hold down 3 jobs just to make rent, Like, in other words, I feel like you have a harder time taking that position if you're in a vulnerable position in society in general. And, people still hang on to that mentality. It's just interesting, when your privilege is not threatened, you're more likely, I feel, to be like, yeah, sure, better time. Anyway, I saw my car, my food, this thing. So
yeah, you remember those billboards, I think are from Mystic Lake, that said, walk in a Democrat, walk out a Republican? Right? So walk in and win a bunch of money and leave as a Republican, right? Because they're going to make you rich. That's the idea. The idea that your social construct, your social setting is what helps create this. I was with a leading Calvinist, deterministic Calvinist, who would sort of hold a view that God determines everything now and we're waiting for the imminent return, to sort of what this 7th one is about. And we were at this meeting that he hosted at his house in San Diego, a guy named Michael Horton, rich guy, or a white guy, in this beautiful place that overlooked this valley in San Diego. And I said, Michael, with your life living here, kind of makes sense why you're a Calvinist, doesn't it? Like, it all broke your way, so you tend to think, I think God made all this stuff for us, right? The people on the other side of this might not feel quite that same way. If the Sermon on the Mount is meant to flip over that and show the other way of living, which I think it is supposed to, then it doesn't reinforce that kind of narrative. It critiques that kind of narrative, which will take us to our 7th one. Where's the 7th one? Anyway, there's a 7th one. It's back here. The dispensational eschatology, which refers to a future king. This is the one Riley was getting at. Rather than it being a holding period, it is do this so that it will hasten it and bring it on. That's that sort of approach. And then number 8, that it inaugurates an eschatology. And when it inaugurates the eschatology, in which the sermon's ethics remain the goal to be approached, yet realized later. So those 3 are kind of all versions of this. We live in a period now, but later things are going to be better. Why I wanted to bring that up is that 3 of the 8 we've looked at so far all have that view. In fact, all 8 might have the view that really we're just in a holding pattern waiting for later. I don't think that's the way to understand the gospel. Riley, I know, doesn't think that. I talked to her about it after the sermon. I have to go get an airplane right after this. But she's got to talk to you about it if that's the only option you've had. Here's an 8th one, or a 9th one. The 9th one is that there's a path, a way for humanity to live here and now, no matter your Christianness. This is a human calling. Jesus is a master teacher for humanity, not for the faithful. All the other 8 were essentially about the faithful. Only for the faithful. This 9th view, lots of my friends, I've been in this path for a long time, say that Jesus' calling is for the thriving of all of humanity, not for a select group of people who only follow the teachings. It's sort of the real opposite of the monastic calling. That it's everybody, we can live this way. We have some friends, some of you went to a concert the other night with Heather Lynn and another guy in town. She's a part of a collective called 9 Beats. 9 Beats is this way of describing the 9 Beatitudes, the 9 beats. Clever. And they talk about the 9-fold path the way that Buddhists would talk about the 8-fold path. So if that's interesting to you, I'd be glad to turn you on to that one. We've talked about this a lot at Solomon's Porch, the thriving of all of humanity, that we participate. We join in this room so we can figure out how to participate with all the others who want to see the thriving and common good of all of humanity, so we can join in the great chorus of God and humanity kind of business. Yeah.
I have a question. As Christians, I think we tend to believe that God's grace covers us, right? Our shortcomings.
Yeah.
So what moves, what's going to drive somebody to move from my shortcomings, I don't need to do social justice, I don't need to go make a difference, I got my work, my family.
Yeah.
What's going to move us? Is there something that would drive us to make a change in our life, rather than just be comfortable with where we're at?
Yeah, Ben's bringing up this great idea. The big critique of this last one is nobody gives a shit. So they're not going to ever give a shit. So they're never going to do this stuff. They don't care. Motivate them to care. Find a way to motivate. And then different people find these motivations. I think the greatest motivation is people actually do fundamentally care. And if we remove the strictures that convince people that caring is impossible, they will do it. I think empathy and empathic ways of life and creating goodness for one another is what we see all the time. Anyway, we just tend to only do it for our kin, our likeness, people like us. But what you do for you, this is Jesus' teaching, what you do for yourself, you do for others, and that is how you view God. So they're inseparable. So the best thing you can do is to free people from the imagination that they should be stingy in a world of scarcity, that this is all going to come to an end and into a world of abundance. End of sermon. All right. I really have to finish. Okay, I did a conversation with these 9 Beats people. I'll put it up on a website. I just want to finish this last thought. Can I? Okay. All right. Here's the +1. Here's another way to view this. View it as all of us and each of us as inclusive. Here's what I mean. If you see Jesus not unleashing 9 for everyone, what all the other 9 do, and instead you see Jesus going around and saying something like, blessed are the pure in heart, like this guy. Blessed are the poor, like this one. Blessed are the meek, like this one. So Jesus is not giving all of humanity, all of the church, every individual a new to-do list. What he's saying is each one of us live in a particular way, and 1 or 2 or 3 of these are really what motivate your life, and the way you're doing it, that's included as well. So what Jesus is doing is saying that everyone in all their ways are included as the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Well, that's not entirely an original thought. This piece of paper, that's up there on the screen is also on a piece of paper. It's one attempt. I don't think it's the best, but it gets at it. It's the Enneagram and the Beatitudes in healthy conversation. If you didn't already put together the 9 Beatitudes and the 9 Enneagram types, they actually correspond. Now, I'm not totally bragging about all the Enneagram, may or may not be your thing. I'm just suggesting that what Jesus might be up to here is a more each of us, all of us included, not where you take on the burden of the other, but you figure out which of those really captures you. One of the questions I think we could ask each person who's doing a soapbox sermon is there a reason you picked that particular blessed are? Because maybe it gives us a clue into their thing. All right, so starting next week, you're going to hear soapbox sermons from everybody else. They'll go 10 minutes each, and then they'll end. And all right, that's it. Okay, the kids are back. Bye, everybody.